Welcome to the world of Stasis, thousands of years ago, before thousands of years older than we've ever seen it. It is a world without memory, without its past, a world after a great slumber has finally awakened, and the world has been changed. So, all throughout the eastern coast here, there's evidence of some great turmoil or battle. Many see it as evidence of dragons, which humanity or anyone has not seen in these recent times. Fire and other powerful magical catastrophes is evident all over this land. But while the inhabitants look up at their ancient ruins and they find familiarity, like the world and their language and culture have not been completely taken from their minds. The story of how they reached this place and what destroyed it all is not evident to them, and the books left behind say very little. First, we'll talk about the humans in the northeast and the elves in the Sovereigndales. So, if all of the east coast is damaged, there is none so more damaged than this area here. While their stone domiciles and ancient castles remain, a great fire seems to have taken everything and destroyed most of the land. And it'll be years before they can plant any crops here. Starvation, but the population is very large, mostly human, but not completely. But after starvation and anarchy take hold, so does chaotic elements like racism and barbarianism. So before too long, it's humans are the only denizens of this area, as racism is easy justification for stealing and taking whatever supplies one can to survive. War too is good justification, as many of these humans very early on in the first 5 or so years of the awakening move on to the Sovereigndales looking for food and chasing game. But what they find there are the wood elves, and war soon breaks out. At first in chaos and panic, but in the first 10 to 20 years, the human elven wars really reach fruition as the populations involved become more organized in spite of the loss of memory. The humans break the elven lines, and Sovereigndale burns for 7 days. Both elves and humans retreat from this terrible smoke and blaze and attempt to settle and survive. Many humans leave with spoils. Many find the coast and build. They build ships. Some of them settle the west, while others find safe passage to these islands here, which have just emerged new in the world. Approximately 30 to 40 years after the awakening, the skirmishes with the elves and humans finally start to come to an end, with the elves of the Sovereigndales finally ridding their homelands of humans in a much needed season of rain. After these battles, they learn that they are much safer in the very high hidden canopies of their trees. And the elves start to, for the first time, living off of the forest floor in their canopies and wooden civilizations. Let's see. At this point, a great schism starts to occur with the elves. Evidence, as history is left after the from before the awakening for the elves too, they find evidence that before the loss of memory, there were elves who left the Sovereign Dales in search of a powerful new magic from before the memory was lost. They treaded north, well, south, into the mountains of the center to find some great magic ley lines, to a great magic that they thought would ultimately be the end of humans and they'd find safety for their race. So, in these times after the awakening, many elves, including the Eladrin who found themselves on the material plane during these battles, leave in search of these old elves to see if that power was found and perhaps a society of elves is up in the mountains for them to find prosperity away from the humans. Now, while these wars are going on, some of the civilians, the ones that didn't leave, start to settle, and power starts to precipitate amidst the chaos. The church rises up as an authority figure in all the chaos and anarchy, offering judgment and a way to settle power and a way to find peace amongst the people. So the church becomes very powerful here, and when they find that the armies return, the armies bow down to the new leaders of these once chaotic lands. The story, however, of the humans of the southeast are a little bit different. Here you have individual kings ruling over small territories. Their history before the awakening was much better preserved, and they used these histories as justification for consolidating their power amidst the ruins of the kingdoms that existed before the awakening. So the barbarians there emulated the rulers of the kingdoms that came before them, the kingdoms they read about in their books of history that were left to them. They adopted the last names and as lineages from these great rulers of the past as justification for their rulership. Last names become very important to these southern kings. They adopted the habits of civilization, only to be destroyed in turn by younger, hungrier barbarian tribes. Provinces, uh, provinces split apart. Besieged cities crumbled and fell. The warlords started to rule successively smaller chunks of territory. But over the past centuries, the wisest and bravest of the warlords who claim lineage through the histories and through their valor in wartime and fair administration in times of peace, they gradually expanded their lands, and now kings again rule nations, supported by noblemen who control large sections of land on their behalves. Of course, these kings rise and fall, and kingdoms are often change hands in the south, in the chaotic southern lands where dinosaurs rule. More recently, in the past 100 years, this volcano here, Mount Drake, erupts and destroys the catfolk forests here. And destroys two nearby human kingdoms. And the orcs, because the humans have to leave their lands and move on to the orcish lands in the mountains here, the orcs are forced from their homes. The catfolk adopt the mountain homelands and a nomadic lifestyle in the plains, learning to hunt the dinosaurs, and the humans spread out, pushing the orcish hordes further and further west. This is the turmoil that sets the tone for the beginning of our campaign. But let's talk a little bit about the West. The first inhabitants of the West were the halflings, who once in their great ships explored the oceans of the West. After the oceans receded and these lands were revealed for the first time, the humans turned their ships into settlements and created the first ever major settlement of the West, calling it Westport. It is still the most prominent settlement here in the West, now consisting of many races who are mostly refugees of the Orcish advance. The Kenku are most prominent here as well. The Kenku find their original homeland in these mountains here. However, after whatever destroyed most of the world also ruined their cities, the Kenku, being in their nature that they cannot create things, could not create a new city. So they were forced from their homelands and have found new homes in Westport. Um, the oceans receded over here as a result of a vast freezing in the middle of the lands. The center mountains have become preternaturally cold in some parts, and many races find themselves migrating out of them. Most notably, the gnomes move south into the hills here and establish their first ever kingdoms. Um, Tinkerdale and Kingdonia. Kingdonia, of course, is where our adventure starts. It exists right here in the hills below the mountains of the Carathians. This castle that is now Kingdonia was a remnant of the past as well. The gnomes found it there, still surviving after the long battles, and they're finding that it still holds some secrets that could be a link to the past. Um, in about 50 to 60 years after the awakening, the inhabitants here, who were once islanders, hopping from mountain tip to mountain tip, after the oceans receded, they found themselves unable to return to their homeland very easily at the tip of the mountains. So they settled for the first time the wetlands of Onda. Human kingdoms grow in, let's see, human kingdoms grow in number in all areas. Onda, mostly human. Uh, they start the first trade with Westport, and the Western civilization follows most prominently the northern oceans here. And for the first time ever, the southeastern kingdoms here in the savage southeast with the dinosaurs start to take on kingdom names and start to last for years and years, um, being able to beat back the savage nature of their neighbors and make prominent kingdoms. In the further south, Galpan, still the most prominent of kingdoms and most successful as it seems, even after the awakening, whatever war that happened was not as terrible for them. So they woke up to their food and gold and prosperity still intact, as their memory serves. However, one thing they don't remember is that before the awakening, a great king of this area, a great warlord, decided to explore the western oceans and the lands that were revealed when the oceans receded. And he took out many ships to explore the West and uh, uh, settled in what is now a budding kingdom of Song-Tu. And then, of course, the great memory loss happened, and Galpan forgot about the ancestry of these ships being of their own. And Galpan and Sung-Tu often war over this great ocean that they call home. There are many other lands that hold inhabitants that are outside of historical knowledge, yet undiscovered. Mostly the Southwest remains open and free of control, a new frontier for people to find and discover. No one knows what happened to the dwarves, for they seem to have disappeared entirely under the ground after some great catastrophe has taken them from their cities, which pocketed the surface in most areas. And the world has changed completely. So our campaign starts 100 years after the awakening, the orcs traveling westward. We find ourselves in Kingdonia for one reason or another. Maybe we were following the refugees west as they fled the orcish horde. Or maybe it's because, if you were an archaeologist, many historical books on magic and the dragonborns of the past, who seem to be the only ones who could wield it before. That's certainly not true now. There's evidence that great studies of dragonborn magic happened here, and that this was the final Kingdonia was the final resting place of a dragonborn scholar who might still have secrets there. So maybe that's what has led you to King.